The continued story of Terran, the assistant pig keeper. I'm glad you've stayed to listen. Now sit round, as Papa Bear reads a story. Chapter 19. The Flood. Gwydion leapt forward. Your power is ended, Akron, he cried. The livid queen staggered for a moment, then turned and fled screaming from the great hall. Terran raced to Elenwe's side, and, heedless of the flames, struggled to raise the girl's limp body. Gwydion sped to overtake Akron. The bard followed them, his sword drawn. Mag had vanished. Gurgi and Prince Run hastened to aid Terran. Within moments, Fluter returned. His face was ashen. The spider tries to drown us, he shouted. Mag has opened the gates to the sea. As the bard called out, Terran heard a thunder of surf. Castle of Llyr trembled. Shouldering the unconscious Elenwe, he stumbled through a ruined casement. Ka circled frantically above the towers. Fluter was urging the companions toward the portals, where they might hope to gain the boat. Terran followed him only to see, in despair, the great iron-bound gates, nearly ripped from their hinges by the pounding water. Shattered, they had swung inward, and the foaming tide rushed upon the island like a ravening beast. Beyond the walls, at the crest of a driving wave, rode Akron's vessel, mast askew and sails flapping. The surviving warriors clung to the sides of the tossing craft and fought to climb aboard. At the bow stood Mag, his face contorted with hate, shaking his fist at the crumbling fortress. The wreckage of Gwydion's boat spun in the flood, and Terran knew all means of escape were shattered with it. The outer walls crumbled upon the first impact of the sea. Blocks of stone shuddered and split away. The towers of Castle of Llyr swayed, and the ground reeled under Terran's feet. Gwydion's voice rang above the tumult. Save yourselves! Castle of Llyr is destroyed! Jump free of the walls or they will crush you! Terran saw that the Prince of Dawn had clambered to the highest rocks of the embankment, to which Akron had fled. There Gwydion strove to lead her from the collapsing stones, but she struck at him and clawed his face. Her shrieks and curses pierced the rumble of onrushing waves. Gwydion faltered and fell, as the embankment gave way. The last barrier of ruined wall toppled. A hissing sheet of water blotted out the sky. Terran clasped Elenwe to him. The flood swept them away and bore them under. Salt foam choked him, and the merciless buffeting of the tide nearly tore the unconscious girl from his arms. He struggled upward, while the island split and sank in a whirlpool that clutched him. Gripping Elenwe, Terran fought clear of a whirlpool, only to fall prey to breakers tossing him like wild stallions. He spun to the trough of the waves, while the sea pounded strength and breath from him. Still, he was able to hope, for it seemed the white-crested breakers were bearing him and his frail burden closer to shore. Dizzied and half-blinded by the green, black waves, Terran caught a confused glimpse of beach and shallow surf. He struck out weakly with his free arm, but in this last effort his failing body betrayed him, and he tumbled into darkness. Terran awoke under a gray sky. The roaring in his ears was not the surf. Two enormous yellow eyes peered into his own. The roaring grew louder. Hot breath was on his face. As Terran's sight cleared, he saw sharp teeth and a pair of tufted ears. He realized in confusion that he was lying flat on his back, and Lion was standing over him with one huge, padded paw on his chest. He cried out in alarm and struggled to free himself. Hello, hello! Prince Run was now bending over him, a wide grin on his round face. Beside him was Fluter. The bard, like Run, was soaked and bedraggled, and strands of dripping seaweed hung from his yellow hair. Steady now, said Fluter. Lion means you no harm. She only wants to be friendly, though sometimes she has odd ways of showing it. He patted the cat's great head and scratched under her mighty jaws. Come, Lion, he coaxed. There's a good girl. Don't stand on my friend, he's not up to it yet. Behave yourself, and I'll play you a tune as soon as my harp strings dry. Fluter turned once more to Terran. We have to thank Lion for a great deal. Everything, in fact. She fished us all out of the surf after the sea had washed us up. If she hadn't, I'm afraid we should still be there. It was really surprising, put in Prince Run. I thought for certain I'd been drowned, and the curious thing was, I couldn't notice any difference. I did have a start when I came to my senses with Lion sitting beside me, said Fluter. She had my harp between her paws as though she couldn't wait for me to wake up and begin again. The creature is mad about my music. That's why she tracked us all the way here, and great Belin, I'm glad she did. But I think she's finally understood there's a time and place for everything. She's really been quite gentle," he added, as Lion began to rub her head against him with such vigor the bard could hardly keep his balance. "Where are the others?" Taryn interrupted anxiously. "Ka, I fear, is nowhere to be found. Gurgi's gone looking for driftwood to build a fire," replied the bard. "Poor creature, he's still terrified of Lion, but he'll get used to her. I've grown quite fond of her myself. It's not often one finds such a good listener, and I think I shall keep her. Or," he added, while Lion nuzzled her whiskers on his neck and gripped the bard with her powerful paws, "perhaps I should put it the other way around." "What of Elenmy? Of Gwydion?" Taryn pressed. The bard's glance fell. "Yes, well," he murmured. "They're here. Gwydion has done all he can." With mounting anxiety, Taryn rose unsteadily to his feet. In the lee of a tumbled rock, Gwydion knelt beside two forms. Taryn stumbled across the beach. Gwydion looked up at him, his face filled with concern. "Elenwy lives," he said, answering. "Elenwy lives," he said, answering the question in Taryn's eyes. "More than that I cannot say. This much I know. Acren no longer holds her." "Acren is dead, then?" Taryn asked. He stared at the black-shrouded figure. "Acren, too, lives," answered Gwydion, "though long she hung between life and death. But her power is broken now. This is the answer to the riddle. Yet I did not know it until I stood before her in the great hall. At first I was not certain. When I understood that she would truly let herself go down to death before giving up Elemy, I knew she had lost command of all but the least of her own enchantments. I read it in her eyes and in her voice. Her day had begun to wane from the moment she was broken with the Lord of Anuvan. The spells of Castle were her last hope. Now they are gone, and Castle lies at the bottom of the sea," Gwydion added. "We need fear Acren no longer." "I fear her still," Taryn said, "and I shall not forget Castle. Acren spoke the truth to me," he went on quietly. "I had not the strength to listen to her any longer. I feared I would tell the hiding place of the Peladrin, and hoped you would slay me before I did. Yet," Taryn added, puzzled, "it was you yourself who spoke." "It was a risk that had to be taken," Gwydion replied. "I had suspected something of the nature of the bauble. As it alone could reveal the spells, so it alone could destroy them. Only then could Elenwy be free. At what cost to herself I could not be sure. Alas, she has suffered deeply and grievously. Perhaps too much." "Dare we waken her?" Taryn whispered. "Touch her not," said Gwydion. "She must waken of herself. We can only hope and wait." Taryn bowed his head. "I would have given my life to keep her from harm, and I would give it now to spare her this." He smiled bitterly. "Acren asked what shall be the lot of an assistant pig-keeper? It is a question I've often asked myself. I see now that the life of an assistant pig-keeper is of little use or import. Even to offer it for someone else is of no avail." "Prince Run would gainsay you," Gwydion answered. "Without you, he would have wandered lost, and in mortal danger." "I swore an oath to King Rudlam," Taryn replied. "I did not break it." "And had you not sworn an oath," Gwydion asked, "would you not have done the same?" Taryn was silent for a while, then nodded. "Yes, I believe I would. It was more than my oath that bound me. He needed my help, as I needed his." He turned to Gwydion. "I remember, too, when a Prince of Dawn aided a foolish assistant pig-keeper. Is it not fitting now for the pig-keeper to aid a prince?" "Whether it be prince or pig-keeper," said Gwydion, "such is the way of a man. The destinies of man are woven one with the other, and you can turn aside from them no more than you can turn aside from your own." "And you, Lord Gwydion," came Acren's voice, "you have put a cruel destiny upon me." The black cloaked figure had risen. Acren clung to the rocks to bear herself up. Her face, half hooded, was drawn and haggard, and her lips were pale. "Death would have been a kindness. Why did you deny it to me?" Taryn shrank back as the once haughty queen raised her head. For an instant he saw her eyes flame again with pride and fury. "You have destroyed me, Gwydion," she cried. "Do you hope to see me grovel at your feet? Are my powers indeed stripped away?" She laughed harshly. "One last remains to me." It was then Taryn saw she held a withered branch of driftwood. She lifted it high, and Taryn gasped as in her hands it blurred and shimmered. Suddenly, in its place, was a dagger. With a shout of triumph, Akron plunged it toward her own breast. Gwydion sprang to her and seized her wrists. Akron fought against him as he tore the blade from her grasp. Once more the dagger became driftwood, which Gwydion snapped in two and cast away. Akron fell sobbing to the sand. Your enchantments have ever been the enchantments of death, said Gwydion. He knelt and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Seek life, Akron. No life remains to me but that of an outcast, cried Akron, turning from him. Leave me to myself. Gwydion nodded. Find your own path, Akron, he said softly. Should it lead you to Cair Dallben, know this, Dallben will not turn you away. The sky had grown heavy with clouds, and though it was little past midday, the high crags, rising at the shore, seemed purple with dusk. Gurgi had built a fire of driftwood, and the companions sat silently near the sleeping Elenwy. Further down the beach, Akron, muffled in her cloak, crouched alone and unmoving. For all that morning, Taryn had not left Elenwy's side. Fearful she might never wake, and fearful, too, that she might waken as a stranger to him still. He did not rest from his weary vigil. Gwydion himself could not foretell how long-lasting was the harm that had been done to her. Do not lose heart, Gwydion said. It is good that she sleeps, and more healing to her spirit than any potion I could give her. Elenwy stirred restlessly. Taryn started up. Gwydion put a hand on his arm and gently drew him back. Elenwy's eyelids fluttered. Gwydion, his face grave, watched closely as her eyes opened and she slowly raised her head. Chapter 20. The Pledge. The princess sat up and looked curiously at the companions. Elenwy, Taryn whispered, do you know us? Taryn of Cair Dallben, said Elenwy. Only an assistant pig-keeper could ask a question like that. Of course I know you. What I don't know is what I'm doing soaking wet and covered with sand on this beach. Gwydion smiled. The Princess Elenwy has come back to us. Gurgi shouted with joy, and in that instant Taryn, Fluter, and Prince Run began talking all at once. Elenwy clapped her hands over her ears. Stop, stop, she cried. You're making my head swim. Listening to you is more confusing than trying to count your fingers and your toes at the same time. The companions forced themselves to be silent, while Gwydion quickly told her all that had happened. When he had finished, Elenwy shook her head. I can see you had a much more interesting time than I had, she said, scratching Lion's chin, as the immense cat purred with pleasure. Especially since I don't recall much of it. Too bad that Mag escaped, Elenwy went on. I wish he were here now. I should have a few things to take up with him. That morning when I was on my way to breakfast, he came looming out of one of the corridors. He told me something very serious had happened, and that I was to come with him immediately. If only we could have warned you, Taryn began. Warned me? Elenwy replied. Of Mag? I knew straight off from the very look of him. He was up to something. Taryn stared at her. And yet you went with him? Well, naturally, said Elenwy. How else was I going to find out? You were so busy sitting in front of my chamber and threatening to have a guard put around me. I knew there was no use trying to get any sense out of you. Do not judge him harshly, said Gwydion, smiling. He thought only to protect you. He was under my orders to do so. Yes, I realized that, said Elenwy. And I soon began to wish all of you had been with me. By then it was too late. We'd no sooner gotten clear of the castle than Mag tied me up, and gagged me. That was the worst of it. I couldn't speak a word. But it spoiled his own scheme, she went on. He had indeed waited in the hills until the searching party was far ahead of us. Then he dragged me into the boat. His shins will be black and blue for a while to come, I assure you. But I dropped my bauble, and since I was gagged, I couldn't make him understand that I wanted it back. But it served him right. Akron was furious when she saw I didn't have it. She blamed Mag, and I'm surprised she didn't have his head off then and there. To me, she was very sweet and thoughtful, so I knew right away something disagreeable was to come. After that, Elenwy continued, Akron cast a spell over me, and I remember very little. Until the bauble was in my hands once more. Then it was very strange. In the light of it, I could see all of you. Not with my eyes, really, but with my heart. I knew you wanted me to destroy the spells, and I wanted to, as much as you did. Yet it was as though there were two of me. One did, and one did not want to give up the spells. I knew it was my only chance to become an enchantress, and if I gave up my powers, then that would be the end of it, I suppose. She said softly to Taryn, I felt a little the way you did long ago in the marshes of Morva, when you had to decide to give up Adon's magic brooch. The rest of it was not pleasant. Eleanor's voice faltered. I'd rather not talk about that. She was silent a moment. Now I shall never be an enchantress. There's nothing left for me now except being a girl. That is more than enough cause for pride, Gwydion said gently. For all you chose to sacrifice, you have kept Akron from ruling Prydain. We owe more than our lives to you. Well, I'm glad the Book of Spells burned up, Eleanor said, but I'm sorry I lost my bauble. By this time it's surely floated far out to sea. She sighed. There's nothing more to be done about that, but I shall miss it. As she spoke, Taryn glimpsed a flickering movement against the dark gray sky. He leaped to his feet. It was Ka swooping landward at top speed. The last of our strays! Cried Fluter. Lion's ears pricked up, her long whiskers twitched, but she made no attempt to lunge for the crow. Instead, she rose to her haunches, and purred fondly at the sight of her former opponent. His feathers bedraggled, and pointing every which way, Ka fluttered above Elenwy. Despite his disreputable appearance, he squawked and snapped his beak with enormous self-satisfaction. Bauble! croaked Ka. Bauble! From his claws, the golden peladrin dropped into Elenwy's outstretched hands. Gwydion at first had decided the companions should rest until morning. But Prince Run was eager to return to Dinas Ridnant. There's a great deal to be done, he said. I'm afraid we've let Mag look after things we should have seen to ourselves. There's more to being a prince than I thought. I've learned that from an assistant pig-keeper, he added, clasping Taryn's hand. And from all of you. There's still more of Mona to be seen. If I'm ever to be king, I'm sure I should see it all, though I hope in a rather different way, so if you don't mind, I should like to set out now. Gurgi had no wish to linger anywhere near Cair Colur, and Fluter could hardly wait to show Lion her new home in his own realm. Elenwy insisted she was able to travel, and at last Gwydion agreed that they would start without delay. And he agreed, too, that they would pass by the cavern to see how Glue fared, for Taryn still held to the promise he had made to help the wretched giant. The ragged band made ready to leave the coast. Akron, finally consenting to voyage to Cair Dallben, walked slowly, withdrawn into her own thoughts, while Lion frisked beside the bard, and Ka sported overhead. Elenwy had gone for a moment to the edge of the surf. Taryn, following her, stood as she watched the dancing waves. I thought I should have a last look at Cair Colur, Elenwy said, just to remember where it is. Or rather, where it isn't. I'm sorry. In a way that it's gone. Outside of Cair Dallben, it was the only home I had. Once you are safe at Dinas Ridnant, Taryn said, I shall stay no longer on Mona. I had hoped, after all you'd been through, that you'd come back with us. But Gwydion is sure that Dallben meant for you to stay here. I suppose he's right. You can hear Dallben now. Being rescued has nothing to do with being educated. Elenwy said nothing for a while. Then she turned to Taryn. One thing more I remembered at Cair Colur. Dallben saying that there was a time when we must be more than what we are. Can it be true that being a young lady is more important than being an enchantress? Perhaps that's what he meant. I shall have to find out for myself. So if I must learn to be a young lady, whatever that may be, that's different than what I am, Elenwy continued, then I shall try to learn it twice as fast as these silly geese at Dinas Ridnant, and be home twice as soon. For Cair Dallben is my only real home now. Why, what's this? Elenwy cried suddenly. The sea has given us a present. She knelt, and from the foaming surf drew a battered object and stripped away the trailing seaweed. Taryn saw an ancient battle horn, bound in silver with a silver mouthpiece. Elenwy turned it over in her hands and looked carefully at it. She smiled sadly. It's all that's left of Cair Colur. What use it might be I don't know and never shall. But if you promise not to forget me until we meet again, I promise not to forget you, and this shall be my pledge. I promise gladly, Terran said. He hesitated. But what pledge have I to give you? I have none other than my word. The word of an assistant pig-keeper, said Elodie. That shall do very well indeed. Here, take it. Giving gifts is much nicer than saying farewell. And yet, Terran answered, we must still say farewell. You know that King Rudlam and Queen Teleria mean to betroth you to Prince Run. Indeed, exclaimed Elodie. Well, I assure you they shall do no such thing. There are limits to having people make up your mind for you. Run has certainly improved. I think this journey was the best thing that ever happened to him, and some day he might even make a respectable sort of king. But as for being betrothed... She stopped and suddenly looked at Terran. Did you seriously think for a moment that I would ever... Terran of Caer Dallben, she cried angrily, her eyes flashing. I am not speaking to you. At least, Elodie added quickly, not for a little while. This concludes The Castle of Llyr. Thank you for listening. And remember, have a good day. You deserve it.